Welcome to the beautiful Targasson, France. Today we're taking a break from our climbing session to spill the tea on everything you need to know about bouldering grades, including different grading systems used around the world, how bouldering grades can differ from indoor rock climbing gyms to outdoor crags, my hot take on downgrading as an ex-elite gymnast, and more. Let's dive in. In a nutshell, bouldering grades are just a way that rock climbers quantify the difficulty level of a rock climb that's being attempted. Just as in gymnastics, where more difficult movements are awarded more points, the more difficult a rock climb, the higher the grade level is going to be. While there are actually a handful of bouldering grade systems used around the world, the two most common are going to be the Fontainebleau or Font scale and the V scale. The V scale is the most common scale that we're going to find in North America and was developed years ago by John Sherman, aka the Verm, who is a famous rock climber developing many boulder problems in Hueco tanks. And this scale is pretty simple. It starts from the most basic climb being a VB, and then increasing through the numbers, going from V0 all the way up to V17, with V17 being the most difficult problem currently in the world. Breaking down the V grade system even further, VB to V2 are your beginner climbs, with VB and V0 being climbs that most people would be able to climb on their very first time in a bouldering gym. Then we move to our intermediate level climbs from V3 to V5, advanced level climbs from V7 to V9 to V10, expert level climbs from V10 to V13 to V14, and V14 to V17 are the most cutting edge elite level climbs. Sometimes on the V grade system, you'll see a plus or a minus attached to the end of the number. For example, a V3 plus would be slightly harder than a V3, but doesn't quite justify going up to the next level of a V4. Similarly, some places will include a little minus sign at the end of the number. For example, a V2 minus. This would imply that the climb is on the easier side, but also doesn't warrant a complete lowering of the grade level. If you travel outside of North America, you might encounter the Fontainebleau or font grading system, which is used especially across Europe. The font grading system isn't quite as straightforward as the V scale. The font system uses a series of numbers going from 3 to 9, but then also throws in the extra caveat of adding letter grades A, B, C, and pluses. On the font scale, your beginner climbs are from 3 to 5. Your intermediate level climbs are the 6 level climbs. Your advanced level climbs are the 7 level climbs, and your elite are the 8 level climbs, and the highest climb in the world at the moment is a 9A. Converting between the two bouldering grade systems for me is just like converting between the standard and metric systems in measurements. What you can do if you're traveling to an area that uses a different bouldering grade system is just Google search bouldering grade conversion chart, where you'll find a ton of images lining up the two systems side by side, where you can easily switch between the two systems. The difficulty of a boulder problem is typically determined by either the first ascensionist at an outdoor crag or the setter or group of setters at an indoor rock climbing gym. As more climbers begin to complete the problem, a consensus is reached, and that original grade can be adjusted slightly up or slightly down. There are a variety of factors that can influence the grade attached to a bouldering problem, the most common one being the height of the climber that's completing and grading the problem, and of course the wingspan. Taller climbers are going to be able to make larger and more reachy moves, whereas smaller climbers are going to be able to scrunch up and box into tighter positions. A climber's own individual style and personal preferences can also have a huge impact on the bouldering grade attached to a problem. For example, a climber who prefers to climb on vertical or slabby terrain may find a steep overhang to be much more difficult, whereas a climber that tends to climb very physically and make big dynamic moves may really struggle on something that's a bit more technical. In a perfect world, the height of a boulder problem or boulder problems where more difficult moves are happening high off the ground shouldn't be given more difficult grades, but in real life practice, this isn't always the case. We as climbers, of course, all have different ways of coping with fear. Climbers that struggle with a fear of heights or a fear of falling may find that boulder problems that are high or high balls may feel physically harder than they are to other climbers that have a better way of controlling those feelings and emotions as they're climbing. Bouldering grades often differ wildly from indoor rock gyms to outdoor crags for a variety of reasons. At an indoor rock gym, the main difference is that all of the handholds and footholds are marked for you, and the route setters are trying to encourage you to climb a boulder in a certain way, there aren't usually a whole lot of extra options. Of course, at an outdoor crag, you don't have brightly colored tape or brightly colored holds that guide you up the climb. You've got a blank canvas, and it's up to you to figure out how you want to send the problem. The footholds that you'll find at an outdoor crag are typically way smaller than anything you'll find at an indoor gym, and I think this is one of the most difficult things to learn as a climber as you're transitioning to the outdoors. Similarly, as the climbing gyms evolve and start presenting a more dynamic and parkour style movement, those types of climbs aren't seen outdoors. When you go outdoors, the holds tend to be more crimpy, and that if you're not used to that from your indoor gym, then the adjustment period can be quite difficult at times. I hit my own 10-year climbiversary last August, and interestingly, at this point being a primarily outdoor boulder, I climb a much higher grade outdoors than I do indoors, and I think that's primarily because I'm used to grabbing much smaller holds, and I've gotten pretty good at using my feet. And when I transition to going back indoors where things get more physical, I'm not used to it, so I typically climb a lower grade indoors. Sometimes the bouldering grades can feel very inconsistent between different rock climbing gyms, training boards, or even outdoor bouldering areas, and I think this is something that's just unavoidable. Each group of setters at rock gyms or each group of climbers at outdoor areas are going to have their own styles, preferences, sizes, which will have an impact on the grades they assign to a problem. Some bouldering gyms will also place an emphasis on the route setters assigning slightly easier grades to attract clientele, but my recommendation here is to view each rock gym, each training board, and each outdoor area as their own separate entity, and to use the grades within that own ecosystem of climbing. Of course, at an indoor rock climbing gym, we don't have to worry too much about environmental factors like the wind, whether it's hot, cold, raining, snowing. The environment's going to be pretty much the same from day to day, so you don't have to worry about that too much with influencing your grades. But when you go outdoors, those environmental factors can have a massive effect on how a difficulty of a boulder problem is perceived. In theory, and I say in theory, the difficulty grade of a boulder problem outdoors should be assigned when there are optimal conditions. If it's really hot outside, a boulder problem is going to feel much more difficult than if it's cold. Sometimes if it's hot, it's going to be downright impossible to do. These optimal conditions can vary between rock types, whether it's sandstone, limestone, or granite, but typically we want colder temperatures and a little bit of wind. One of the factors that can influence a grade attached to a boulder problem, especially if it's a first ascent, is that if the first ascent is completed under non-optimal conditions, it's hot out, it's a bit humid, then the climb is going to feel much more difficult to this climber than a climber that comes along later using those prime conditions. When talking about different environmental factors such as temperatures, one thing that I always remind my climbing friends is that an easier climb completed on a hot day is going to feel as difficult as a harder climb completed on a cold day under great conditions. And this can also happen indoors. In the summer months here, my rock gym doesn't have any air conditioning, so I typically am climbing 2 to 3 grades lower on a moon board than I would during the winter months. The bouldering grade attached to a given boulder problem typically evolves over time, especially as we start to see more climbers of different heights, different climbing styles, complete the climb under different environmental conditions. In general, with the current climbing trends, we tend to see that the grades are usually lowered, which we call downgrading in climbing. Now, I do have a hot take on this coming from my elite gymnastics background. I was a gymnast for 17 years. In gymnastics, we have a rule book where the difficulty values of every single movement that's ever been competed is awarded a certain value, which is changed every 4 years. Now, this difficulty value is awarded by an international group of judges. What you'll see happening in gymnastics is that during a group of 4 years, there'll be a few certain movements that are given a high difficulty rating, and all of a sudden, all of the top gymnasts are going to be doing that movement, and the routines that you'll see competed are going to start to look very similar. So what the international committee will do every 4 years is that they'll downgrade actual certain movements so that they control a shift and get more variety in the routines. The only flaw I see here in this system is that from one group of 4 years to the next, the movement isn't actually more difficult. It's just that the gymnasts have realized, well, this move is given more points, so I'm going to do it. And the international group of judges has said, well, we're bored of seeing this, so we're going to downgrade it, make it easier on paper, so no one will do it anymore, and they're going to shift to doing other movements. When I look at rock climbing through my gymnastics eyes and I see a bouldering problem that's been established at a certain difficulty level for many years by many climbers, and then all of a sudden a new guidebook comes along or a bunch of climbers come along and say that's easier, this is something that I don't always agree with, but then again, there are certain times when downgrading can be acceptable, especially if a new handhold has appeared, something's gotten bigger, rock erosion has caused the holds to change. Of course, yeah, that's an example when downgrading could be appropriate. Whether you hate them or love them, bouldering grades are thrown in your face basically from the very first day you start climbing. Here are my top 3 tips on how you can use bouldering grades positively in your own climbing. Number 1, always remember that you are much more than the number that you've climbed. All of your climbing partners are going to care about you as a person and not how hard a boulder that you've climbed. Number 2, find your own intrinsic motivation to complete a climb and not just choose a climb solely based on the bouldering grade it's been given. This is a mistake that I've made a handful of times throughout the years, and I can tell you that almost every single time I've gone to a climb just because of the number that it's been given, I've been a little bit disappointed. The boulders that always give me the most satisfaction are the ones that present me my own personal challenges, push me out of my comfort zones, and the ones that I find beautiful. Number 3, use bouldering grades as your guide to orient yourself when you're visiting a new climbing area or a bouldering gym. The highest grade that I've climbed outdoors is a V14, but anytime that I'm visiting a new bouldering area, because I have no idea what the grades are going to be like, I typically look for boulders in the V9 to V11 range, and as I get more comfortable, then I can start trying things that are harder, or I can start trying things that are a little bit easier if I find that the area tends to be a bit sandbagged. You can do the same thing in a rock climbing gym. If you're switching gyms, jump down a few grades, do a few boulders, get used to the style, and then once you have an idea of how that grading system works at that gym, then have at it. We'd love to hear your thoughts and previous experiences with bouldering grades. Be sure to drop those in the comments below. Keep climbing, and we'll see you in the next video.